Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you for the overwhelming response. Yet again, like I was already saying, today we are at the sixth webinar of the ongoing series on specific learning disorders. Today, we'll be talking about understanding dysgraphia, writing difficulties with none other than Geetha ji. More about her a little later. For us as an organization, let me tell you, like I always do, a little bit about ability. So for us as an organization, all carers of children with special needs, that is, therapists, special educators, teachers, and of course, parents, you all are at the center of our universe. Every child wants to thrive, and every child should be given the opportunity to thrive. And therefore, our mission is to make things easier for you all. And when we say easier, we mean making it more accessible, making it more affordable, and most important of all, making it more effective for you all. One way we have been able to do that is through technology. But while we understand that technology could help a lot, we also do realize that technology alone is insufficient. Without the caregivers, especially, technology could not bring about a significant change. After all, technology is just a support system that makes our lives easier, just like there are other support systems required, resources, community members. And that's also few of the things that we bring to you as an organization, because no one should have to do this alone, right? Ability brings to you community and other resources to enable the best chance of discovering your child's true potential. One of the way we bring to you the resources is through our YouTube channel, which has hundreds of useful videos for you all to learn from. If you haven't yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, the link to the channel is being shared in the chat box right now. So go check it out and subscribe to stay updated with all our future updates and video postings. We also have our Facebook page. Thousands of people are already following it. You can join them too and stay updated with whatever events Ability is organizing and learn from it. We have been organizing webinars. This webinar is no different, which is for the purpose of foundational knowledge building. And we have also started to run workshops. The concept of workshops is a little different. It is more of an interactive learning offering, which happens in a small setting so that you can interact directly with the expert. And that's what we offer through workshops. If you haven't had a chance to experience Ability workshops yet, go check it out and keep an eye on your inbox. We will be sending you updates about our upcoming workshops and newsletters. You can subscribe or register for any one of them soon. So, coming to today's topic, like I already mentioned, this is the sixth webinar from the ongoing series. We had talked about introduction, identification, how to plan instructions, how to offer support systems for children with specific learning disorders. And one of the types of specific learning disorder that we talked about in the last webinar is dyslexia. And today we'll be talking about another type, which is dysgraphia. And the last webinar from the series would be on dyscalculia. So let's get started without further ado. Let me introduce you once again for anyone who is new and who has not already heard Madam Geetha Gopi sharing her wonderful knowledge. She is a rehabilitation practitioner and psychologist, and also the director of professional program management at the Sashaktikaran Trust with over 30 years of experience in helping children with special needs. She has worked in international schools and has done some intensive work in curriculum development and adaptations, behavioral management, coordinating and promoting best educational practices using UDL principles among staff and other parents. Thank you so much, Geetha ji, for joining us. And dear attendees, I would like to inform you all that despite keeping unwell, such is her dedication for the community and for spreading and sharing her knowledge and awareness that despite keeping unwell, she has joined us for the session today. So let's make her efforts effective. And without making her wait any further, let's get started. Over to you. Thank you so much for joining us. We are truly, truly grateful.
Uh, Warm good evening to everyone, and thank you, Ability, for all the kind words, Swati in particular. Yes, I don't have a good throat today, and I'm not keeping well, so pardon me if I don't sound good. So, uh, if you need something repeated, yes, please don't hesitate to ask. I'll try my best to be clear. So let's get started. Okay. Yeah. So shall I go over to the screen share?
Sure.
Okay, before we delve into today's topic, I'll just do a quick recap of what was the last webinar about. We had talked about reading difficulties, that is dyslexia, and what are the kinds of reading difficulties that we see commonly in the classroom in children with specific learning disorders. We had also talked and discussed about, how in the early schooling years, when reading is emerging, how children have to be taught how to read. That is, learning to read is the instructional focus. Reading fluency has to be worked on. Whereas in the higher grade levels, it is more of reading to learn. So they should have had a fair amount of reading in by then, and therefore the reading skills that they have attained should be used for learning purposes. And children with reading difficulties have to be supported in this area, because even learning to read is a difficult process for them. So even well into when they move out of primary into middle school, high also, they may have difficulties in this area, and therefore they will need additional support systems to so that their reading difficulties do not interfere with their learning process. We also talked about comprehension, how it is very, very important that comprehension has to be targetedly taught, because comprehension has to do with a lot of information processing of what is being read or what is being heard. So therefore, many children with SLD do have, difficulties in information processing, which does manifest as reading, writing, or math disorders. And therefore, it is very important to teach that information processing and comprehension skills in a very targeted manner. And comprehension, again, different kinds of comprehension, especially the direct comprehension, is what is focused on a lot in the early schooling years. But as as you go along, more and more of inferential comprehension is focused on. And therefore, it is important that even in the early schooling years, you start working a little bit on inferential comprehension as well, while you're doing direct comprehension. Some bit of questioning which leads to inferences will help lay the foundation for later, more complicated inferential comprehension. So that was from the last webinar. So moving on, uh, our focus today is writing difficulties that are seen in children with specific learning disorders. And we are going to look at two different aspects of writing. One is handwriting or penmanship, and then there is creative or expressive writing. So basically, we are going to see what are the difficulties they face in the classroom, and then look at how they can be helped in both these areas. So let's get about understanding what is dysgraphia. It is again, as with all the other SLD disorders, whether it's reading, writing, or math, dysgraphia is a neurological disorder, and it's a disorder of written expression. So it impairs or it interferes with their ability to write. That is, the fine motor skills that are required for writing, for holding a pencil, for the body posture, for moving the pencil across paper. So all these kind of skills, the fine motor skills that are necessary for doing the manual process of writing, is impaired or affected. Various aspects of the writing process, like when you when you do expressive writing or creative writing, the thinking, the thought process, putting your ideas on paper, using the right kind of vocabulary, spelling them correctly, using punctuation, writing it legibly, spacing the words appropriately, the size of the letters or the case, the lowercase, uppercase, etc. All these are very important, and ultimately, a good written piece will have all these things in place. And children with dysgraphia struggle with these areas. So, which is what results in their writing pieces. And when you look at their writing pieces, you find many of these aspects are missing or is deficient. Skills and processes that underlie the writing. Like we talked about reading, it is very closely connected. There are certain skills and processes that have to be in place for writing to develop. So the first thing when we talk about the writing process is, holding a pencil and moving it on paper, or the handwriting part of it, or the penmanship part of it. And for this, the skills that are required is the right amount of hand and finger dexterity. That is the fine motor skills, the pencil grip, the visuomotor coordination. Like when you are writing, you need to know how to balance the book, where your other hand should be. If you're using your right or left hand for writing, whichever you're dominant in, what should the other hand be doing? To support the what you're writing. How do you hold your body posture while writing to write more effectively? So all these things come under, all these are skills and processes that are necessary for developing the physical act of writing. Then when you come to expressive or creative writing, it's a slightly different set of skills and processes. Here the ideas or the creativity of the person is involved, how much knowledge the child has about the topic that they're going to write, the background information they already have about the topic they're going to write. That is really important, plays a major role in creative or expressive writing. And then whether they can build upon those ideas and present it in a more creative manner. So ideas or creativity is a big part of expressive and creative writing. And then it's not enough to have those ideas, but then you need to be able to put those ideas in an organized fashion, so in a logical sequence. So unless you do that, the written pieces, when somebody reads the written pieces, you won't find a flow to the writing piece. So it might be disjointed. So organizing the ideas is very important. Use of the right kind of words, that is, using a wide range of vocabulary, not repeating the same kind of words over and over again. Um, Especially when you start with young kids, you find, initially they may be using one word for one concept, but as they grow older, they realize that there are other words that can be used to express same concept. For example, if you take a word like said, the word, initially the children would always be saying, so, but someone said, someone told. And then as they grow and as their vocabulary develops, they realize that instead of saying said all the time, you can use words like replied or answered or scolded, reprimanded, questioned. These are all synonyms of said, and they convey a slightly more refined meaning to what you're writing. So definitely vocabulary and the expansion of vocabulary plays a very good part in developing expressive and creative writing. Then comes grammar, the sentence construction, the kind of sentences you use, whether you form sentences that are correct to the way it is said in the language. So that forms part of grammar. And then punctuation, because where to put the different punctuation marks, such as full stop, comma, space, speech marks or quotation marks, exclamatory mark, and so on. So, placing the punctuation appropriately when they write sentences, and then spellings. How they spell those words correctly. So, all these things put together, when they work in coherence with each other, that produces a good expressive or creative writing piece. And these processes are involved. Uh, in any written piece. So it is not just children with SLD. For anybody to learn creative or expressive writing, these are the basic skills and processes required. And what happens is, with in children with specific learning disorders, they have difficulties in these in acquiring these skills, or they may be deficient in these skills, or there may be, again, as I said in the reading webinar, these processes may have certain glitches or snags, because of which that processing will not be taking place properly, which impairs, ultimately it impairs their written piece, and it shows in their writing. So why is writing important? I mean, why can't we just do away with writing? First and foremost is, in schools all over the world, being able to write is very important for, moving through schooling successfully. There's a heavy dependence on writing in all schools all the world over, and in particularly in countries like India, yes, we depend heavily on writing. Still. Then the other factors, it is a way by which educators or teachers assess and grade their students' knowledge, or how much they have understood, or how they progressed in that particular skill, by looking at their written pieces. So it may be an expressive writing piece, it may be answering questions based on the topic that they have been taught. So whatever it is the writing pieces that give a very basic means through which teachers can assess and grade students, acquisition of the topic, how well they have understood the topic. Writing is also a powerful tool for learning. So, when we read, we learn a lot. But if we just read, especially if there are bigger pieces to read, it always helps when you're jotting down notes, right? Even with any of us, when we read something, especially if you're reading heavy stuff, while you're reading, if you're making notes, if you're writing little bullet points of the important things, that's a way of keeping up with learning the topic. So you're not just blindly reading it, but you're making written notes, which helps, to for the concept to go in, for you to understand the concept better. So it is a powerful tool for learning. And then when you think about expressive or creative writing, writing is a powerful way to express yourself or to communicate your thoughts and ideas to other people. And especially if you have wide range of thoughts. I mean, not everything can be spoken, right? But when it is through writing, you can convey a lot more information, and probably in a better manner add more nuances to your communication when you use writing as a means to express yourself. So this is why writing is important. Also, from from a long time, the ability to write has also, actually using a pen or a pencil or a writing tool has also resulted in a lot of neurosciences studies which show that several neural pathways and synapses are well connected, and it brings about better integration into your information processing system when the muscles for, when you write, when all those muscles and neural pathways are stimulated through writing. Which, when it comes to typing, that doesn't happen, because in typing you don't get that tactile and kinesthetic, the feel of actually going through the motions of forming the letters or the words. So it's a completely different ballgame when it comes to typing. So actually, the physical process of writing is useful in keeping a lot of these neural pathways stimulated and active. It is like, if I draw an analogy, it is similar to when you say, if you're walking on a treadmill for 1 hour, okay, you that gives you some bit of exercise for your body and for your legs. But if you're building in walking throughout your day, every now and then you're climbing the stairs, or you're, every even if you're sitting in front of a computer, if after say an hour you take a little walk around the office, or you go have a drink of water and come back, that gives much more neural stimulation and breaks the monotony. So it is something similar to that. I mean, when you write physically, actually more neural pathways are stimulated. And lots of studies are actually, showing that That is how it is, and therefore writing is a very, very important tool to still teach, even though we have technology at hand, and we can kind of do away with writing. A lot of people are doing away with writing. Still, there is a place for writing as a very important tool, not for just learning or expressing oneself, but also to keep your neural pathways and your processes well stimulated and well balanced and integrated. So when we come into writing, I talked about earlier, that we can divide it into two major areas. One is the physical process of writing, that is handwriting or penmanship, and then there's the expressive writing or creative writing. So let's look at, what are some of the writing difficulties that you see in the physical process of writing, that is handwriting or penmanship. Children who have dysgraphia or who have difficulties with writing, normally you tend to, if you're a very observant educator, you find that they may hold the pencil in an unusual fashion. So they may not be holding it the right way, that right pencil grasp may not be there. Some children hold like that. Some children use more fingers instead of two. They may use three or four, or some may grab the pencil almost like that. So, unusual wrist patterns, body. They also adjust their bodies in different ways. Some people crouch a lot over the paper that they're writing. They bring their face really very close to the paper. Some of them move very far away, and the grip on the pencil also, some children may display very poor grip. That is, they may be holding the pencil in a very weak fashion. So when you are not holding it tight enough, or the right amount of grip is not there, you cannot maneuver the pencil over paper. So poor pencil grip. Some children, on the other hand, might hold the pencil too tightly. So, when they hold it too tightly, they strain all the muscles in the arm and on the hand, and therefore, again, they have trouble writing on paper, and the fluency is affected, or the process of writing is affected. So, these are some of the things: the way they hold the paper in position while writing, the way they hold their body posture, that is also important. Some of them may not. If you do a close observation, you might find children who have writing difficulties may be having, it's not necessary they have, but they may be having um, these kind of difficulties. So if they do have these kind of difficulties, you need to target those. Difficulty spacing things out on paper or within the margins. For example, if they're writing in an exercise book, they may not leave space between the words. They may write everything all jumbled up together. So you can't make out which word, the words, you can't pick out the words in the sentence. So there may be too little space given or no space at all, or you even find things where the spacing is too wide. So one word is written there, and then there's too much of a space, and then there's the other word written. So again, the continuity is affected. So difficulty spacing things out on paper or within the margin. Sometimes they start right from where the margin of the notebook is. They start right at the margin point, and they start go on across the line. But when they come to the next line, they don't start right at the margin. They may move away a little bit, and therefore you find there is a kind of a V shape, one side V shape indent when they write. This is again a very clear indication of having poor spatial orientation on paper. So this is why they have difficulty with spacing and line orientation. Some of them will start as writing on the line, and then they may it may go beyond, between the. Sometimes the line comes in between the words. The line will start running. So they start writing properly, and then it starts dipping. So the line comes in between, and then they dip on to the next line even. So these kind of difficulties are seen with space orientation and space and line orientation. Another thing that we see is inconsistent handwriting. With some children, you may find they are writing, but there's no pattern, or there's no distinct style to their writing. For example, as educators, when you take a child's notebook, most educators can, after a while, they can figure out, okay, this book belongs to this student, because there's a clear writing style. The handwriting is clear enough for you to understand who wrote it. But with children who have these writing issues, handwriting issues in particular, their handwriting may be very inconsistent. Sometimes they may write straight up, sometimes they may slant to the left, sometimes write even within a line or within a page, you'll find all kinds of handwriting appearing. The shapes of the letters, the way they write the letters or numbers may be different in different times. They may confuse between the upper and lowercase letters, that is, capital letters and the small letters. So even in between a word, you might find capitals popping up where it's not required. Even in the middle of a word, there might be capital letters coming up. Or they may not be using, the lower and upper case in the correct fashion. They may also be switching between sometimes cursive, sometimes manuscript, and again, no clear, way of writing is established. So that again, as it going back, the handwriting pattern, the way they do it, may be very inconsistent. So there's no definitive. They don't develop that style of their own handwriting. That impression is not created. I know in the younger classes, when the children are still learning to write, this happens with all the children. But again, as I said, it is when this thing persists. When most of the children, once their writing abilities develop and they've grown out of it and they've developed their own handwriting style, you find these children are still having inconsistent handwriting. And this is an indication of, possible handwriting issues. Another thing that very, very commonly seen in the classroom is very slow to write. The process of writing itself, they take a long time to write or copy from the board or from the book. So again, slow writing may be indicative of handwriting issues, but they can also be a spilling over effect of reading difficulties, because they take so much time in reading. When we, so for example, when regular people who do not have writing issues, when they copy from the board, what happens is they kind of read, say, two to three words and chunk them together in their mind and then write them together. So you're not looking up for each word at the board. Whereas with children who have reading difficulties, they may be looking at the board for each word or maybe even each letter. They may be diligently, very effortfully copying it like that. So which slows them down. So you have to be very careful to see what is slowing them down. Whether it is the reading issues, which means the reading issues have to be targeted, as well as do something about the slowness in writing, make some modifications accordingly. And hopefully, at some point, their speed will catch up. It may or may not catch up with their peers, but at least some bit of, speed would catch up. So, what do we do when we know these are some of the very commonly seen handwriting difficulties? What is it that we have to do when we have to work with their handwriting skills? So, when we have to work with their handwriting skills, we have to do activities which will improve their hand muscle strength. If you find their hand muscle strength or their body posture is not correct or their visual-motor coordination is not correct, you don't just work on the handwriting per se alone. You have to do other activities, all different kinds of fine motor activities, which will improve these things. And one very nice way of doing it is, as I've said earlier, do it with the things that happen at home. Use them in domestic chores, get them to, water the plants. Instead of using a hose, get them to carry a small bucket of water and then pour using a, water onto the plants using a mug. So, where hand dexterity, hand muscle strength is automatically improved. And when they're doing those things, the body posture, the coordination, all that is help. This is just one example. Almost anything and everything we do around the house or in the school or in art and craft, all this can be utilized to improve hand muscle strength. So it doesn't have to be just the act of writing, but there are a lot of other fun activities, which can be used to improve hand muscle strength. And that way you will also be teaching them to become very useful, productive members at home, teaching them basic life skills as well. Use tactile learning to complement learning by writing. I told you earlier that writing is a way to learn also. So if the writing is impaired, that means their learning will also be automatically impaired. So you have to compensate for that. Obviously, we are working on writing remediation, but we cannot let the writing impairment or the writing deficiency to catch up before they learn. So, learning has to happen whether the writing difficulty is there or not. So, try to compensate for that writing impairment by using other modes of learning. So, use the visual mode, use the tactile mode. So, again, using a lot of tactile activities, writing on sand, using sandpaper letters, tracing around, letter cutouts. All these things actually help, or giving big outlines of, letters, words, etc. And they can trace inside those with their finger or using finger paint those letters using finger paint. Or this kind of tactile input can be used to complement or supplement what they're losing by way of not being able to write. So that can complement and improve their learning, which is otherwise hampered because of writing deficiencies in the writing area. You can use custom-made writing aids. Nowadays in the market, a lot of pencil grips, silicone or rubber pencil grips are available. Some help with the tripod pencil grip. Some have, literally by a concave, a convex, concave kind of shapes. Plenty of these grips are available in the market. You also get, chubby pencils if they have, very fine pencil grip issues. Initially, at least, you can start off with the chubby pencils, which are thicker. So it helps them to hold and maneuver, and then as they develop their hand muscle dexterity, you can move on to the regular pencils. And even in the regular pencils, sometimes when there is effortful writing, that is when you have to use these pencil grips, because it eases uh, the the effort that they're putting into the writing, and it helps them to write better, to maneuver the pencil better on paper. And then one very, very important factor in teaching handwriting is offering positive reinforcement and support instead of criticizing. A lot of times we find children are criticized heavily, especially in the school setting, when they're not able to keep up with the writing part of it, especially copying from the board. You have to realize these children have deficiencies in this area. So even if they make an effort to write at least part of what you have given, offer positive reinforcement and provide additional support. You can give support by way of using a peer buddy, for example, somebody who writes faster. So the child can be asked to write a small portion, which the child will obviously take a long time to write, and the rest of the writing can be helped on with a peer buddy in the classroom. Or you can use siblings at home or somebody like that to help them complete their writing. Also, when there are children who have handwriting issues, and you do work on them, but you know that some bit of writing has developed, but it may not be in accordance with what is expected of grade level. So when they're moving into higher classes, the amount of writing that they have to do just jumps, really quantum leaps happen. And even if with remediation, these children may not catch up to that. So then you have to really rethink and probably start, you know that no matter what you do, they will still have serious difficulties in the manual process of writing. So then introduce keyboarding skills and typing early on. Normally, I suggest like till the primary levels, we try and work with writing and handwriting and all that. But from the fifth onwards, slowly, once when you see the rate of progress, that the child will definitely encounter problems with large amounts of writing. So transition them early into slowly start the typing skills, so that by the time they come into the higher grades like the high school, middle school, they're able to type with speed. So at least they can appear for they can produce written pieces through typing. So when we look at expressive writing now, what are the commonly seen difficulties? In just as we talked with reading and comprehension, where reading and understanding the text doesn't happen simultaneously, or they may have difficulties in that area. Similarly, children have difficulties thinking and writing simultaneously. So the thought process and the act of writing don't go in sync. So they may have difficulties in doing that. Written pieces may display very poor vocabulary. Just like I explained earlier, a child who has limited vocabulary will be using the same words again and again, which make their writing pieces very monotonous and boring to read. Spelling errors are seen. A lot of spelling errors, even the commonly used words. Again, there might be a lot of spelling errors creeping into their writing pieces. And many a time, the spelling errors are not necessarily due to the writing difficulty. It is mainly due to a reading difficulty. It's a spillover of the reading difficulty because their phonological processes are impaired, or their sight word vocabulary has not developed well enough. So therefore, they have spelling issues, which is reflected when they do creative writing pieces. Many of them, they are very low risk takers, so they want to produce perfect work. So many of the children with SLD tend to erase a lot, and sometimes they erase so much that by the time they have written over what they have erased, the work starts looking really messy. It becomes very difficult for the teacher to even read, or even the child to read what they have read, because sometimes you ask them to read out to you what they have written and they find it difficult. So frequent erasing is seen because they're trying to get it right when they're reading, with regard to spellings or with regard to the words, etc. Sentences, the sentence construction in when they do expressive writing, the length of the sentences may be very limited. So they may not write really long sentences, even if they are in high school. For example, if you ask them to write about say, give me a sentence with cat. I mean, a grade one or grade two child would say, I have a cat, but and write that. But even in high school, middle school, high, you'll find these children coming up with such simple sentences because they know they have problems with spelling. If they write more, they will make more errors. They'll also not finish on time. They know they are slow. So they reduce the length of sentences is very reduced. So they write really small sentences, very basic sentences. Types of sentences that they write may be very limited or maybe in a repetitive pattern. If you're an educator who's taught younger kids, you will realize that when children first start writing a composition, many of their sentences would be repetitive. For example, if you ask them to write about my pet, they would start off with my pet is a dog, my pet is this, my pet's name is this, and that my pet will be repeating itself, which means that the sentence pattern is not changing. They are writing very monotonous, repetitive pattern of sentences. But with regular children, when they don't have writing issues, and as their reading and comprehension and all other skills, vocabulary, etc., expand, they start producing more sentence types, more interesting sentences. And they move away from this repetitive pattern sentences. Whereas with the children who have writing difficulties, they don't experiment much with types of sentences. They may have difficulty in putting those down. Um, the complexity of sentences may also be limited, like adding details to sentences. So, if you're, for example, if you say, I have a pet, uh, if you're extending that sentence to make it more complex, you could say, I have a pet who lives in a kennel, and add more details, and she plays with me when I'm free. So there you see you've extended not only the length, the type, the complexity of the sentence. From a very simple sentence, you've produced more complex and more compound sentences. So the complexity in the sentences also may be very limited in children who have writing difficulties. And another very key area is they rarely edit or proofread their own writing pieces. They don't even realize they've made so many errors in their writing. Either they erase too much and that slows them down, so their writing never gets completed, or they just write because they have to finish, and they don't go back and check. And even if they check, sometimes, many a time, they're not able to pick up the things that they've left out. It may be the punctuation or the spelling errors, or the kind of sentences, or the even words would be missing in between, and they may not pick up on those. So what do we have to do when we have to help with expressive writing? Once we know what the difficulties are, we have to realize that we have to plug into those difficulties. So one good way of starting the writing process or to get into expressive writing is always related to something that they have done or that they know already of. So, if you've done something in your reading lessons, you've read a story, you've talked about the characters, maybe your writing can be on, okay, who's the character in the story? Write a few sentences about the character of the story. So you are basically trying to give a springboard. They already have the content for the writing part is taken care of because you've already done that in your reading lesson. Or you can get them to research on something beforehand. So if you're going to do an expressive writing piece, you can tell them, okay, this is what we're going to do writing on tomorrow. So I want you to look up this topic, search the net, get information about it. So they already have some background knowledge, which will help them to, for the content part of their writing. And usually also try and bring in your other areas. It doesn't mean that expressive writing has to be just limited to language. You can use all your other subject areas. You can use math, for example. You can use science and social studies, for example. If you've taught, the water cycle in science, get them to write about the water cycle in their language expressive writing, because they've already learned that concept. So it is easier for them to write about it because that the background knowledge is already there. And even things like I've used even math topics, which I know many people find it difficult to connect math with writing. And it's not just writing or reading numbers or number words or word problems. You can even get them to think and write about the different concepts that you've taught in math. For example, if you've taught addition and then you've taught subtraction, you can get them to write, how do you differentiate? What are the differences between addition and subtraction? So what you're doing is something that they've learned. You are getting them to process that information by encouraging them to think in an organized fashion and then translating it into their expressive writing, putting it out on paper. So all these things ultimately help every subject area. So you don't have to restrict expressive writing just to the language area. The expressive writing topics can be pulled from all different areas, or something that is very current, even current events, or some project that you've done in school, or some experiment that you've watched, if you take the children on a field trip, that can form the basis of expressive writing. So where did you go, what did you do there, how did you enjoy the trip, what are the different things that fascinated you in the field trip? So already the child has had experience in the field trip, which then they find is easier to uh, put on paper, because the thought process is there. What they have to do is to arrange it in order and then write it out. So using real life experiences into the creative writing process is very good. And always start off with especially in the early writing years, when you're teaching them like how to write, to do expressive writing, you need to always start with something that they know. Start from the known commodity. The known factor is they have already experienced that. They've either gone on a field trip or they've done something in the class. Maybe they made a sandwich in the class. So that was part of their healthy food science topic. Translate that into their expressive writing. How did you make the sandwich? So what are the steps involved? So again, here you're working not only on just expressive writing, but all the skills and processes that are involved to develop expressive writing. And if it is something that they've done through experience, especially hands-on activities, even art activities can be converted into this. When we do art activities, I usually tell them, let's do this. And after doing the art activity, how did we go about doing this? So again, use that in creative writing. So use their experiential learning as much as possible when you're trying to develop expressive writing skills, especially in the early years. So what are most of the skills that we need to work on when we have to promote expressive writing skills? One is fluency. That is, fluency is like we talked about in reading. Fluency is basically being able to write with a certain amount of speed and with accuracy, with as few errors as possible. So, writing fluency is something that we need to work on. um, Vocabulary. Vocabulary is another thing. Again, this is very closely connected with reading and comprehension. So, developing vocabulary in reading and comprehension and making it readily available and working with the vocabulary in reading and comprehension will definitely have a spilling over positive impact on their expressive writing. And you can provide them those options also. In the classroom, you can actually give them options of, okay, instead of this word, there are a few other words which you can use. So put those options up so that they will start readily using those vocabulary in their expressive writing. Sentence construction and cohesion, building sentences, how to write it grammatically correctly, what needs to come first, what needs to happen next, and so on, putting the words in correct order. And then if you're writing a passage or writing a composition, the cohesion part of it, how does one sentence link up with the other? Again, remember, we talked about all this even in reading and comprehension. So it's very similar, except that when it is reading, you're trying to read and connect the meaning of the previous sentence to the next sentence to get a big picture. Whereas when you're actually writing the first sentence and the next sentence has to be linked so that there is a flow to the concept, to the topic that you're writing. Reasoning and background knowledge, I already talked about this. Experiential learning, the children need to know about the topic that they are going to write. So if they are given a completely unseen, unknown topic, especially in the early years when you're trying to develop expressive writing, that is very, very difficult. So relate it to topics that they have already learned. Working memory and attention. Again, attention is a big part of any activity that you do. So if they have attention issues, definitely you might have to break the writing pieces into small parts, and ask them to do a little bit and then give them a little bit of break and then come back to it, and so on. Also, working memory issues, what they have written previously, they may not remember when they're going to write the next few sentences. So they may have to go back and reread, what they've already written in order to link it. So getting them into the habit of doing that is very important. And then last but not the least, which is the most important part, teach the writing process. This is very, very important. The writing process typically involves, the first part is thinking about the topic, generating the ideas that you need to put into the writing. The second part is organizing those ideas, which is putting them in a proper sequence so that, suppose you're writing about how to make a sandwich, the step one should come first and then step two. You shouldn't be jumping the steps. Or suppose you're writing about my pet, there should be a certain flow. You start with what your pet is, and if your pet has a name, mention that. Then you can describe what the pet looks like, and then you can talk about what the pet can do, and then finally you can probably conclude it with how the pet and you interact, or how it is great to have a pet like this in your house. So there is a certain flow or a certain organization to the ideas. So, first, brainstorming those ideas is important, and then sequencing those ideas in a certain organized fashion. That is important. So, getting them to do that, what is first, what's next, and so on. So, teaching them those organization skills. And then use that organization, use those bullet points, or, those, what you have put forth, the brainstorming points that you put forth in an order into writing the first draft. When we say writing, it is writing the first draft, which will always be a rough draft. And this is not just children with SLA, it's also with regular children. The first draft will have a lot of mistakes because they're thinking and writing at the same time. So even with regular kids, when they're when they're early on with expressive writing, little children cannot handle two, three processes at one time. So there will be errors. But what we need to do is, once the first draft is done, go back and give feedback to the children on where they have, uh, you know, uh, uh, go back to editing it or proofreading it. Go line by line, word by word, get them to read those pieces to you and see whether they can realize, oh, I missed a word here, or I missed putting a full stop, or I didn't use a capital where it was necessary. If they can pick it up themselves, yes, otherwise you clue them on. And then with some of the children, with many of the children, sometimes in each line in the margin, I usually put a an indicator of what I pencil. I don't mark it in pen. I usually do it with pencil so that they have the chance of going back, erasing it and rewriting, writing it again, correct, making their first corrections. So get them to do the editing part of it, and that is a process in itself. And many children with SLD will really fall down in this area. To some extent, you can teach them proofreading and editing, but again, if they have reading difficulties, and some children may remain poor spellers or may have grammar issues all their life, no matter how much remediation you do. And that's why nowadays we have technology to help support this. You can, it doesn't matter, once you have the ideas and you put it down, you have spell check, you have grammar check, everything that is available on the computer, so they can learn how to edit using technology. And then finally you come into the rewriting part. So once you've edited it, you incorporate all those errors and you do away with the errors and rewrite the writing piece. So the rewriting part, sometimes especially in early expressive writing, rewriting may not be just one. There may be two or three edits before they finally rewrite the final piece. And it's okay, take your time. I mean, it doesn't mean that in one period you have to finish the whole process of writing. It's just not possible. So you may be in one period, you may be doing just the thinking and the organization part of it. The next another day, you might be you can go back to the thinking and the organizing that you have done and read those points, refresh the memory of the children, and then use that again to frame the sentences. And then editing and can come at a different. So you, if you are doing one writing piece, it can be spread over, especially in the initial stages, over to 3 to 4 periods. But it is important to go through that process. Don't rush it up, because if you go through that and if most of your children start getting it, um, then they will become natural writers, because then you can speed up. You can just give topics and give them some bit of support on organizing their ideas or have a brainstorming discussion, and they'll be able to carry on with the expressive writing. And when it comes to children with SLD, they do have difficulties in, they may have difficulty in writing and rewriting and all that. You can get them to, either use a scribe or a peer buddy to help them with the writing, rewriting part of it, or get them to type it if necessary. In the early years, though, I would prefer if they can write it themselves, even if it is small pieces. Don't insist on long pieces at that time. If it is, say 5 sentences for the rest of the kids, maybe 2 or 3 for this child, because they have this issue. So you can, make those kind of accommodations for children who have writing difficulties. And organizing is one area where they really have trouble. So nowadays there are things called graphic organizers, like a visual diagrammatic thing, like a flow chart or a pictorial format where you can put the main points in. And then once that is there on one side of the notebook, they can look at that organizer and go in sequence to put it down on paper when they're actually doing the draft. So that once the discussion is over, the points are still there on paper. The points have been jotted down, and so they can look at that and then frame their sentences based on those points. So the points are not disappearing, because a lot of times in schools what we do tend to do is we have the discussion and then we give them ask them to write. But with many young children, and particularly those who are not natural writers, and especially those who have writing issues, as in specific learning disorders, you definitely need to give or this graphic organizers, which are diagrammatic or pictorial representations of the ideas, which can be jotted out down like clue points, and the clue points can then be expanded to form sentences when they're actually doing the first draft of their writing. So again, that kind of is a vast area. And remember, expressive writing skills are usually, quite often, more often than not, it is linked with dyslexia or reading disorders. So it is the thought process that, they may have difficulty with, or they may have limited vocabulary, which is seen in reading and comprehension area, which actually spills over into the writing area. So you have to, this is why I said in the earlier webinar also, that reading comprehension is probably the most important skill to teach. Because when you tackle that, it has a positive spilling over impact on all the other areas, whether it is writing, whether it is spelling, whether it is developing fluency of thoughts, organizing thoughts, whether it is, and using these kind of skills and processes, even in doing math. Even in math they have to follow the procedure or steps in a logical order and sequence. So all these will have a, if you work hard at reading and comprehension, and then do these activities which I've mentioned with the regard to handwriting as well as expressive writing, this can really help and go a long way in developing these skills. So I think that brings us to an end of this webinar. I think it's been pretty exhaustive. Thankfully, I didn't have a voice problem, so I spared you the trouble. Uh, okay, now I'm really open for Q&A, questions and answer session.
Thank you so much, Geetha ji, for the very informative session. That was indeed very useful for all the attendees who have joined us. Before I proceed to ask a few of the questions that we have received, I would like to inform our attendees, and especially the ones who are special educators and teachers, if you have joined us, it would be really, really helpful for us if you could fill a survey form that our team members would be sharing in the chat box shortly. The chat box is filled with praises for your session, by the way, like always. So, yeah, a lot of people seem to have benefited from it. Thank you everyone for such kind words for Geetha ji and on behalf of her and on behalf of the entire team Ability also. So, if you could fill the survey for us, all the professionals who have joined us today, special educators, teachers, therapists, counselor, if you're any one of them, please do fill the survey for us. It would help us to serve you better. Okay, so let's move to the questions. The first question that I have is from an educator called Shilpa. So Shilpa is saying that some students are there in her class who are writing the letters in an opposite way, or probably what I think she means is writing letters reverse. And some students are very slow in writing. So how can she help her students?
Um, you have to, if you remember the handwriting things that I talked about, reversals are usually, if they're are a part of normal development. One thing, especially if you are teaching a preschool or KG, teachers will know that a lot of children have reversals or mirror images at the young ages when they are starting to read, recognize letters. It's a normal process, but most children outgrow that. What happens with children who have SLDs, they don't outgrow that naturally. So if it persists, till about 6 years, 7 years, definitely that's a big red flag, and you need to do something about it. But having said that, you don't have to wait until 6 or 7 years. When you find the children are doing this reversals, this is why I said, you can provide things like, have a in front of the children, preferably on the desk. I usually used to have like a number line taped on the desk, like you have name cards taped on the desk for young children. You can have a number line or a letter line, A to Z, the way you want them to write, that taped on their desk. So they can always look before they write. And this is one way of making them aware that where they're making mistakes. They may not be, if you really look closely, they may not be reversing all the letters or all the numbers. There may be some clear patterns that there are certain letters which they are reversing or certain numbers which they are reversing, and making them, drawing their attention to it. And quite often you find B, D, these are the numbers, the number 3 and the number 9, 7, sometimes 5. These are all the numbers which are very commonly reversed. And getting them to go over, providing a model at the desk, and whenever they are writing those, cautioning them, like even during a spelling test, when I'm doing a dictation, for example, if I've called out the word bag and I tell them, okay, it begins with a b sound, You can look at, I just give a clue, and it is not just for SLD children, you can do it for all children. you know just give a general clue that please look into your letter line before you write. So that is an indication, okay, before I even start to write the B, I can look into the letter line and check once again before I put it on paper. Or another thing of doing it, another way of doing it, this is one way, because this really facilitates, it sensitizes the child and makes them aware of where they're making mistakes. Because a lot of time these children are not aware they're making mistakes, so they just write thinking it is correct, and when they see all the markings on the book, they get upset, and that really brings down their self-esteem. So making them aware that you do have difficulties in these numbers or these letters, so whenever you are going to write this number, and it is easier in the younger classes because they don't have a lot of writing to do. Yeah, they're just beginning to write letters, numbers, and all that. So right from then, when you build this habit in them, they will learn that even throughout later on also, you're making them more independent. You as a teacher don't have to always go back and tell them that okay, you made a mistake here. They know they may make a mistake, so they are going towards more errorless learning. So they have a model right in front of them. So that is one way of doing it. There are also other, there are exercises like especially when it comes to reading comprehension. We do a lot of the BD reversals. There are things which hold up the thumb. So if you hold up the left thumb, which is the first letter B, that is in the shape of a B, and the other one is in the shape of a D. So B and D, that can, holding the thumb up to realize, that becomes very tactile and kinesthetic. Or even writing on the desk just with their finger. A lot of times I tell them just write it first, look at the letter line or number line and write it on the desk before you write it on the paper. So getting that tactile input, especially when they're learning letters and numbers in the initial stages. And I've used it not just with SLD children, even children with Down syndrome, yeah, children with autism, anybody who has trouble remembering how the letters are written or how the numbers are written. I usually tell them, before you write it on paper, write it just with your finger, trace it on the table. Look at the model given and trace it on the table, then write it on the paper. A few maybe a few months or few sessions, depending on the severity of the challenges that the child has, they tend to do that. After a while, they tend to do it themselves, when they have to. And this comes into play even in math, when they're adding two-digit numbers. If they add the ones, and they've got a two-digit number, which to carry and which to put in the ones place is a confusion, because they have these reversal issues. And again, instead of writing it straight away, I usually tell them, write that number on the table first. So then giving them that tactile, that helps them to see and feel that the ones is the one on the right hand side, the last number. So that is what goes in the ones place. The other one can be moved to carry over in the tens place. So give that a tactile and kinesthetic. It's very, very important for children with these issues.
Interesting. Hope that answers your question. Okay, the next one is from Sushi. Sushi is asking if it is better to make or teach the child cursive writing, and does that help in any way to improve the writing skills of children with SLD?
There are a lot of conflicting studies on this. And personally, from my experience, I really see writing not as writing doesn't come first. Usually, if you look at most how we develop language, first the speaking and listening comes, and then the reading part of it comes, and understanding, comprehension part. The writing or expressive writing part is actually at the end, right? It is the end product of all these other language related skills. So, and as I said, reading comprehension is very, very closely linked with writing. So, if you're teaching cursive, what happens is, where is cursive there in reading and comprehension? All the books are in manuscript and print, right? Other than teachers who use cursive to write on the board, anything, all their reading matter is in print. So I generally do not insist on cursive writing. And also, if you're introducing cursive writing, especially with children with SLD, we know they have so many other issues. They have trouble with reading, they may have trouble with comprehending, with logical reasoning and all that. So where do you really need to insist on cursive writing? It's not necessary, right? What is important is whether they are able to read, comprehend, and put their ideas on paper. So does it matter whether whether they write in print or cursive? It doesn't matter. And for reading, which is a precursor to writing, for reading and comprehension, all their printed matter is not in cursive. So personally
Right.
speaking, I don't prefer, but if the children are catching on, and I don't prefer if cursive is introduced very early on as well, because the children are not developmentally ready for that. I find that a lot in, I don't know when this crept into the Indian system, especially because when I went to school, we would have cursive even just introduced in the third grade, because you will be writing in print until then, and then slowly cursive is introduced. You just do like one page of copywriting in cursive every day, and slowly by the time you're in middle school, it develops. Okay, so it was a very slow process. But nowadays, I find that in the zeal of putting in too much into the curriculum, I find even from KG onwards, when the lowercase letters are introduced, they're taught to write in cursive. And forget SLD, even regular children are not really developmentally ready. And if you speak to a lot of KG teachers, preschool and KG teachers, they say that they spend so much time on getting the children to write within those small, thin, four-lined paper. And not only write within those thin four-line paper, but also to write in cursive. Now, that amount of time should be more productively used in the early years to develop reading, to develop comprehension, to develop phonics, to develop speaking and listening skills, to develop vocabulary. Because unless these things are there, that writing will not happen anyways. If you spend a lot of time in just doing the cursive, especially in the younger age, you're missing out on valuable time that you can use for developing all the other skills, which will ultimately contribute to expressive writing. So I personally wouldn't push for cursive, but having said that, many children, they loved, if their peers are doing cursive, they like to try that. And I don't discourage them as long as they are able to maintain a certain speed and legibility with cursive, that is fine. What I normally tell the children is it is important to write legibly, and it should be easy for the reader to read what you have written. Um, and
Right.
as much as possible to write with a certain amount of speed. So if writing in cursive is preventing that, then it's better not to go into cursive.
Sure. Sure. Hope that answers your question, Sushi. Okay, since we have already overshot the time, so maybe I'll take only three more questions for the day. The next one is from Ten Guillermo. Pardon me if I've pronounced your name incorrectly, Ten. The question is, how do we help in writing for those children who don't have any motor skill issue in particular, but they simply lack the interest to write? So how can we help these children?
Make your writing topics interesting. Yeah, as I said, link their writing activities to something that they have learned. Now, this is a very common problem. If you look at even us, with technology advancing, with smartphones and you know tabs and computers, how much do we write? We have almost given up on writing. It's only in the schooling or the college years you're required to write, and after that, you can forget writing for the rest of your life. You can just type, right? So, I mean, that is the age these children are born in. This is what they are seeing as models. Are they seeing the parents or the teachers doing a lot of writing? They're not. So how can you expect children to be interested in writing? There is a mismatch between what their present world is and what they are expected to do in school. So this is again why I said our school system needs a big overhaul. When you are talking about writing, work on the expressive writing skills, because that is what they need later on, right? If they don't have to do the manual writing, there's still the typing or the computer that can substitute for the manual writing. But having ideas, putting those ideas in an organized fashion, uh, putting those ideas on, either through typing or through writing is what is important. Creating that creativity and expression is what is important. Written expression is important. It's not necessary to go through the manual process of writing. So unnecessary writing should be avoided in schools. When I say unnecessary writing, a lot of schools give so much of, especially in the younger classes, they put so much on the board for the children to copy. By the time the child copies and then does the exercise, they've already lost interest. So what can you do? I mean, so avoid the unnecessary copying. Instead, give printed worksheets. So the child can just has to read, comprehend, and then do the written exercise only. So the writing is restricted to the responses that they have to give. Either it is to write a composition or to write the answer. They don't have to copy the question or the passage or whatever. So avoid the unnecessary copying or the writing that goes on. Instead, focus on how to be creative and produce good writing pieces. Which is why I said the writing process, teaching the writing process is very, very important. And you
Sure.
can't teach it because I told you it's a slow process. You may have to break it into parts, and you can't do one writing piece in one day or 2 days. It might be spread over a week. One topic would writing one small composition can take a week. Every day, one little period. Adds on to finally bringing the editing and rewriting of that one piece. So if you have to spend so much time on teaching the writing process, all your unnecessary copying, all the unnecessary writing should be taken off. So you should plan your lessons accordingly. Materials should
Definitely.
be planned accordingly.
Teaching the writing process is very important. Okay, the next question is from one of the educators called Daniel Serrao. So Daniel is asking, what techniques can I apply in helping my students learn writing, especially during these times of COVID when the teaching mode has become virtual and the virtual classes are running. So what can he do?
Yes, writing has taken a big hit in the COVID situation in virtual classes, and I have no real hard and fast answer to that. But what we are doing, trying to do is, especially when we work with children who have writing issues, we share the worksheets or something. Again, bring it to worksheets. Avoid the unnecessary copying part of it, and only the necessary part is the child has to fill in with writing. So the learning is not hampered. So when normally what we do is we share the worksheets beforehand, so the child has a printed copy with them, and then we can guide them through the session. Nowadays, recently, I even talked to some of my staff who are very tech savvy. I'm not a very tech savvy person, so I try to keep up with some of my younger staff, and they were talking about things like liveworksheets.com, which is a kind of an app software kind of thing where you can go online and there are ready-made worksheets there. The child can fill in live. The responses can be filled in live, so you can, and they can share. Otherwise, if you're in a place where they don't have a lot of tech support, which is true in a lot of cases, not every parent or not every child or their home's net connection, all these are issues, we use the WhatsApp. Basically send the worksheets beforehand, ask them to fill it in, and then share it with us again. So then we can talk to them about the errors that they've made, and they can make those corrections themselves. So again, there's a positive in that, because then we are making them aware of where the errors are, and we're giving a feedback right there, so that it helps in their writing. But the act of writing, yes, it has diminished a lot because of the virtual classrooms, and it's very, very difficult to get especially children who are reluctant to write in a virtual platform, to get and write them. It is one of the negatives of
Yeah,
especially in the early
of
years.
course.
Especially in the early years.
Definitely. The pandemic has given us a lot of negatives, including this, but hopefully we'll sail through. Okay. So the next question and the last question for today's session is from Anjali. Anjali is saying how to make the child remember the pattern of the letters, and is it okay for a child to need physical or verbal prompts to be able to write?
Especially in the early stages, give all the multimodalities, give the visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and tactile, because multisensory always helps give information in multiple modalities. So whichever is the stronger modality, yes, the child will catch on with that, but the other modalities will add on or supplement the learning. So if you're talking about early writing, yes, as I said, use sand, writing in sand, or using Play-Doh to create the letters. Use your bodies even. Writing in the air with big finger movements, that helps. I even do a little, and don't make it monotonous, because I have the kids dip their finger in water and write in water, or use finger paint to write on paper. So give different kinds of activities. They can even feel the letters, sandpaper letters or letter cutouts, which, foam or plastic letter cutouts, feel that and then write on paper. So a lot of these activities can be given.
Sure. Hope that helps you, Anjali, and all the other attendees who are listening to us today. Okay, that brings us to the end of today's session. For more of your questions, we'll again be back, which will be the last session of the ongoing series next Thursday at the same time at 4:30 p.m. If you have not already registered for the webinar, the link to the landing page is being shared by our team members. Please do join the next session. Thank you so much, Geetha ji, for the amazing session and for the amazing answers. Like always, is there something that you would like to say towards the end?
Thank you, Ability, for this wonderful platform. And yeah, it's great to see the comments that are coming in. I also see people sharing, things that they have done to improve writing. As I said, I'm not a very computer savvy person, so I try to catch up with the younger generation. Yeah, some of them are already putting in apps and things that they have used to improve writing through the virtual platform. And I think it's thank you to all the participants for responding in such a great fashion. Yes, I'll definitely go into those and have a look at how things work and learn from you all as well. Okay, so thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, dear attendees, thank you for being such an engaged audience and being involved in the conversation throughout. Our speakers always appreciate the interesting questions that we receive from our community members. So thank you so much for being such an engaged audience. Please do share your feedback about today's session. It will help us improve the experience further for you all. We have our next webinar on 13th, which is on sensory processing. If you would like to register for the webinar, the link for that is also being shared in the chat box right now. And I would once again like to request all the professionals who have joined us for today's session to please fill the survey for us. It will help us understand your needs and requirements better and then eventually help us to serve it better. Thank you so much for joining us. Do share your feedback about today's session. Thank you, Geetha ji.